Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Cybersecurity discussions between Ideal Integrations, Blue Bastion, and Henderson Brothers. I'm Michael Stratos from Ideal Integrations, and I have with me Corey Bussard, Luke McOmie from Blue Bastion, Dan Coast, and Pete Horne from Henderson Brothers. These roundtables are designed to address critical areas of your security protocols, risk management, and financing strategies in short segments. Today's topic is security for cloud and SaaS, software as a service. So to set some kind of a stage, on August 25th, President Biden convened a cybersecurity meeting with large private sector organizations likes of Apple, IBM, Travelers, and Google. Following that meeting, many of these companies and others pledged to invest billions to enhance their cybersecurity. Many of these organizations are large cloud hosting providers, SaaS providers, or software developers, right? So Luke, Corey, nearly every organization uses some type of technology or software from one of these tech giants. What should these entities be doing with their own security to make sure that they are compatible with the likes of Microsoft and or Google?
Yeah, I think that one of the key things that really can be done is you need to make sure that in your security program, you are building in a relationship with those third-party companies. So if you are leveraging Exchange, if you are using SolarWinds, if you're using these various pieces of software that you've heard in the news, you want to make sure that you have a trusted relationship with that vendor and that provider. I think that's critical. That way, if an incident does occur or if something is happening, you have an ability to communicate with them, to be involved and to have kind of that loop, right? You're not just out in the cloud somewhere as some random software. I think another important thing that we learned from these meetings, they were fairly broad about how and what they're going to do to improve security. There's great ideas among here, but the big takeaway, I think, was really the focus on reallocation or assignment of budget for the purpose of improving information security. I think that too many organizations are still focused on, let's buy a firewall, let's put it on the edge, and we're secure, right? We'll do one pen test a year, and that's strong enough and good enough. That's all we need to do to make sure that we're secure. And it's not the late 1990s, early 2000s anymore. It is a completely different world. And if we're going to be successful in protecting our companies and ourselves, and especially our clients and the information there that's critical to our business, we have to assign an appropriate budget to be able to do that, an appropriate headcount to where we can have the talent or have the resources we need to be successful. For smaller businesses that may not be able to do that, they need to find third-party partners that they can leverage who can come in and be that trusted provider or partner to help them down that path.
Corey, you have any comments?
Yeah, absolutely. So going right in line with what Luke was saying about budget, an organization really needs to understand that security has many different aspects, right? So if you go to a big cloud provider or any cloud provider, really, they may provide security inherently as part of that platform, application, or service. But the real question there is, what are the security gaps in that solution? And then how are you going to resolve them? Is that going to be through something like MFA? Maybe there's no multi-factor authentication applied to that service or application or thing that you're utilizing for your business. So there's going to be inherent issues or inherent security items that you're going to have to understand. And then you're also going to have to understand how you're going to discover new holes or how are you going to find out what your gaps are? And that goes back to something that Luke said, a yearly pen test, while that's great, it gives you that one clip in time. What would be very valuable to you is doing those on a more often recurring basis so that you can understand, are there new holes with those applications or services? So now you can have mitigation discussions surrounding how are we going to mitigate these point in time instead of waiting a whole entire year to have that discussion, because for that whole entire year, now you're behind the 8 ball on that because you may have had these vulnerabilities out there for 8 months, 6 months, 4 months, and been completely unaware of them. So being able to have that happen in a more timely fashion on a recurring basis would also be helpful. So whenever going back to what Luke was saying about budget, It's no longer just put the firewall in place. Well, there's a lot more to that budget than I just went with cloud provider, I'm safe, or I just went with this thing, I'm safe. There's, okay, they're going to provide some security. I have to bring some security to the table. And I have to also continuously look for new vulnerabilities, new holes, so that as I discover them, we can make decisions on how we're going to mitigate them.
Yeah. So as you guys are talking, I'm sitting there thinking of something that we talk about with people all the time. And I think that the same subject keeps coming back up. When you go with any kind of provider like that, they all have shared responsibility models, right? They all have documents that say, here's a delineation of what we're responsible for and what you are responsible for. And I think that there's a misnomer out there, or at least to some degree, that if you go with cloud and or software as a service, right, that it's off your plate. It is their responsibility. And it is, I can't stress enough, that is not the case. There is a certain level that all of those providers, no exception, that they say this is your responsibility for security. And if that's a part that gets breached, they have no liability. That is not their, I don't want to say it's not their problem, but it's not. So any of these things, be very aware of what that shared responsibility model is for anything that you use that is cloud-based.
And that's a great segue onto the risk and insurance side of things. You know, just from a pure risk management standpoint, these contracts are typically capping their liability at the value of said contract. So, you know, if you're paying that provider $50,000 or $100,000 a year, that's probably the maximum amount that you're going to be able to recover from that specific provider if there is a situation. So read the fine print, right? Let's look at those contracts and see what that language actually says. Pete, anything to add to that?
I mean, that's common in SaaS. Your cloud providers, they're large companies. They have a lot of leverage. So you might want to just know what you're signing beforehand. And I think some of that carries over to read the fine print of your policy too. You know, Dan, you and I look at clients' exclusions all the time in policies, and we find things like, you know, mandatory patches and updates and following software and manufacturer prescriptions on keeping, you know, whatever that cloud or software item is up to date. That could impact whether your cyber coverage is available too. So, you know, it's just a trend of how your security, your role in security is probably more important, and you should be more engaged than, you know, what you've had in the past or what you might be led to believe with just buying something off the shelf.
So let me ask this, Dan, Pete, what are some of the funding and risk management considerations for investing in your own cybersecurity protections, right? Including purchasing cyber liability insurance policy versus relying on your cloud, SaaS, or other tech vendors. What are the carriers targeting for how the insured make those security design or / reliance decisions?
Yeah, so just to take a step back for a second, you mentioned the whole funding aspect of this. The cybersecurity policy is funded and typically bought, you know, by the CFO or the controller. But a lot of the information and the cybersecurity measures are done, you know, in the IT department, CISO, whatever it might be. So to kind of where this should start is with those two people both having a seat at the table, talking about this together. The cyber policy shouldn't be bought in a silo. Should be something that's done in conjunction with that team, right? So that's where I firmly believe that should start. And then from the funding mechanisms, right, it's a belt and suspenders approach. You'll hear me say that. Buying a cyber insurance policy does not negate the need to do all of the proper, what I call blocking and tackling in the background with Blue Bastion, ideal integrations, and all the proper network infrastructure and security measures, cyber hygiene, if you will. So, you know, the simple thing here is that if you have a breach, it's going to be unbelievably disruptive, even if you have a cyber policy, right? What the cyber policy is going to do is step in and help fund for those additional costs from the breach, whether that be forensics or paying a ransom, what have you. But the best approach is get your house in order on the front end so you don't have to deal with this on the back end, quite frankly.
And that comes full circle on, you're buying something off the shelf. it has security baked in, but your organization still has to take some steps to complete the entire security picture for your organization. So that's part of the funding decision, that's part of the budget decision, that's part of all of these pieces, whether it's an insurance policy or SaaS or cloud that you're buying, and just bringing it in for your organization.
And then from a purely financial side of things, understanding what type of balance sheet risk are we willing to take from a cyber perspective? Are we okay taking more front end risk from a retention standpoint? Maybe that, where we are at $100,000, $250,000, $500,000 retention. If we can handle that, maybe we should buy more limit up the tower, depending upon what that risk is. So let's look at benchmarking, let's look at claim examples. Let's look at some of the data that helps us make some sound decisions around what limit we should buy, and also looking at that retention and that funding mechanism around the cyber policy.
Yep. So again, as I listen to all this, it's a labyrinth for people to kind of, manage. It's not easy. And as you said, changing constantly. So you balance this idea of what you spend per, like per company on your security versus the cyber liability policy covering something. And we've seen some people just default to the policy. Okay, we got breached, pay the ransom, let's be done with it. It's not that simple. It's just not that simple. We'll call it an easy button, but it's still not easy. And it's not like you can just recover in a couple hours when you go through that. And as you know, as time goes on, the insurance companies are going to make that harder and harder to be an easy button, right? Which makes sense. It's not there to be an easy button, right? To insure. So there's a lot of things to navigate. And with some of the questions that we were kind of talking offline about, that the insurance companies are now asking to, even get insured, especially around some of the recent events that have occurred specific to software vendors, you're going to be somewhat forced to follow guidelines on patching and things of that nature that are outside of your normal patching, which you believe you've implemented to be more secure than what the manufacturer is requiring you to do, because you want to test it before it brings down a system because of a bug or things like that. So lots of stuff to navigate here. So on that note, I think what we come to the conclusion is there's probably another episode on this somewhere on the line. All right. So any final comments from the panel?
I think the one thing that we should touch base on, we've mentioned it before, is that, don't get bogged down in the vendor who's getting compromised, right? This is not, everybody gets hacked. All these different companies have vulnerabilities and weaknesses. All software has different issues that could potentially be exploitable. The bigger picture here is focusing on your mission and making sure that you're working towards maturity and advancing what you currently have. That, I think that as long as that's your focus, that you're making a move in the right direction.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Corey. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate you all. And for everybody, I'm Michael Stratos. Stay safe.